Well, I'll do my best to keep you awake at this time in the evening. When I was talking to Sue Tai a couple of weeks back about what I might talk to you about tonight, might interest you, we talked, and then afterwards, after I put the phone down, I sat and I wrote down a question that I thought she'd asked. And it was that. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that I understand it. So I thought, well, let's try again and see what happens. And even that wasn't that brilliant. So I just kept on working on it until I came up with this. And I think that 8-word question says everything that's in that 32-word one at the beginning. It's about getting to the essence of what we're trying to determine. And even asking that, I guess there are some of you in the room who are thinking, well, I'm not that bothered about my most powerful contribution. What I really want is a bit of work-life balance. Well, I have to tell you that I don't think there's actually any such thing. I don't think that we should be thinking in terms of work and life. Why would we? Shouldn't we actually be looking for a balanced life? Wouldn't that be great? Why should our work be so far removed from our life? So I think it's about getting that balance through our physical, emotional, mental and spiritual selves. By physical, I mean things like warmth, shelter, food. Emotionally, I mean things like our relationships with our loved ones at home, but wider and wider, certainly into our workplace. And, most importantly, our self-esteem. Without that, we are nothing. And then, mentally, our personal growth, our professional growth, our achievement, our desire for meaning in our lives. And then spiritually, our desire to make a difference, our desire to be in service to and of others. But I'm not talking about religion when I'm talking about spiritually, and I'm not talking about alcohol either, although it's been flowing well tonight. Back in the 19th century, when the Americans were doing their best to annihilate the Native American Indians, one chief said this, that they've been trying so hard to mould us that they forgot one thing, that we think with our hearts as well as our heads. And that's really key to everything that I want to talk to you about tonight. Because when we connect our head and our heart, we gain all sorts of things, a profusion of things. But one of the things we gain is time. But not time in the Einstein sense of it's the thing that keeps everything from happening at once. Time in terms of just being in the world rather than doing. So I'd like to ask you a question. Why are we here? And I don't mean tonight in this room at this event. I mean, why are we here? On this planet, in the 21st century, in the Western world? Well, I'm not going to ask you to answer. I'm going to give you my answer. And my answer goes like this. We're here to learn about relationship. And if we're here to learn about relationship, the next question is, which relationship are we here to learn about? And my answer to that is the one without self. Because at the end of the day, there isn't any. And if we're here to learn about our relationship with ourselves, and we spend more of our waking time at work than we do with our significant other, why wouldn't we want to use that time to learn about relationship? And if that's the case, then why wouldn't we also want to treat everybody in our working lives, in our workplaces, in the same way that we treat those people at home, in our private lives, and that we love? That's always provided, of course, that we treat those people at home well. But there's the potential for that split again. And that's the split that I think we really need to heal. That's where we really need to look deeply at who we are and how we operate. And it's difficult because the modern business world is hugely pressurized. It's very stressed. You know it and I know it. It's full of deadlines. It's absolutely full of stuff, so that we end up not having the time. We end up losing sight of how to prioritize. Sometimes to the extent that we've just no idea what we ought to be doing next. Now, 20 years ago, business life was different. And it all changed around 10 years ago. And you're here because of it. It's the technology world that we live in, and particularly the world of email, that is causing us so many issues. When I started work in the 1960s, there was a joke that used to go around that jobsworths, because that's what we called them, most people who did the minimum, was that they carbon copied everything on memo to as many people as they could to cover their backsides. Now, of course, everybody copies everything to everybody. And what happens? How many emails do you guys get a day? How many? Hundreds. Every single day. And how many of them are important? Very few. Now, I'm not talking about this from a theoretical point of view. I've been there, I've done it. I've run the UK office of an international business. I've had all the pressures from head office in Hong Kong. I've had all the financial responsibility. I've had all the staff responsibility, all the client responsibility, all the multi-million-pound project responsibility. So I know what it's like. And it gets very painful. And we go on working harder and harder and longer and later and end up taking work home. And before we know it, we're working virtually 24/7. And it becomes not what am I going to do next, but when do I get to do anything? And that pressure of email is so constant. And there's a little worm going on inside our heads that says, what if I miss the one email that I really can't afford to miss? It's horrendous, isn't it? And it takes time away from us. And time is a precious commodity. It's our greatest loss, and it's our greatest 21st century dis-ease. I can tell you, just in our business, my business partner is my wife, and the number of hours she spends on email, crafting email, is unbelievable. And I find it so frustrating. But then that's just a reflection of the time I have to spend. But don't we sit there for hours cruising email, wondering what's going to come next, waiting for that little ding from Microsoft that says another email's in our box? How often do we switch programs to see if it's important or not? And how often is it not important? But what really matters is our accountability. Our Our accountability to the business, yes. Our accountability to our bosses, yes. Our accountability to our fellow teammates, yes. But what about our accountability to ourselves? Because that's what's really important. And if we choose to live our lives with integrity and with rigour, then we really do become accountable. And it makes such a difference in our world. It no longer becomes ticking boxes, accountability. It's vital to the welfare of ourselves, our colleagues, and the organisations that we work in. I could talk to you about practical ways of managing time in terms of time management, traditional time management, but there are plenty of books out there, plenty of CDs, plenty of courses to go on that will tell you how to make lists that work, how to manage a project using MS Project with giant spreadsheets. But none of that tells us exactly what we need to do. None of that tells us how to achieve it. Because to do that, we need to think about it. And we really do need to nurture that most precious commodity. So the big question is, what do we do when we can no longer work smarter, or harder, or longer, or later? Well, my answer is that we have to take responsibility for ourselves. And we do that on the 4 levels that I mentioned earlier: physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. But the real big question, of course, is how? What are the tools that we could use? Well, I've got 3 things that I think are really useful and that I found worked over many years and for many people. And they are these: meditation, NLP or neuro-linguistic programming, and a thing called a thinking environment. And we're going to try a couple of them, and I'll talk about the third one. So, when these 3 are used in combination, they are incredibly powerful. They work on their own, and they're worth doing on their own. But brought together in combination, the power increases exponentially. And it can make a huge difference in any of your lives if you really set about it and knuckle down to them. The thing is, which of us wouldn't want those 3 things in our lives? I know a certain amount of stress we're told is good for us. But wouldn't it be great to have the time to properly access our imagination and apply that to the projects that we're working on? And then be able to take the best action because we've thought it through thoroughly. Well, you can have all of those 3 things if you do all of those 3 things. So let's talk about each of them in more detail. Meditation or mindfulness. Mindfulness is just another word for meditation. And it's about stilling our conscious mind. It's about just letting the thoughts go to a point where we can listen to what's going on. We can hear our subconscious. And then with NLP, we can actually take the access to that subconscious and use it constructively and get to our imagination and have the wildest thoughts we want and bring them back to something that's totally tangible. And then a thinking environment is a way of being in the world that allows us to hear ourselves and, just as importantly, to hear others. We don't find the time to do that. And when we do that, we create the best solutions. So, in a bit more detail, let's take a look at meditation. I use the word mindfulness in connection with it. And the Americans actually, nowadays on the West Coast, talk about mindfulness meditation. Well, if you think about that, and the two things mean the same, you don't need both words. It doesn't really matter which you use. I just wonder, is there anybody in the room who actually meditates or has tried meditation? Good. It's interesting because the first group, there are very few. The second group, over half. And this group, very few. But it's just the way things like that go. It's very simple and straightforward. And if you're willing, I thought we might just try it for a couple of minutes. You up for that? Okay. Well, all you've got to do is sit upright in your chair with your feet slightly apart and firmly on the ground. And your swig of beer helps, absolutely. Your hands in your lap, but not grasped and not interlinked. Okay, so just one hand on the other. And if you're comfortable with it, but only if you're comfortable with it, just gently close your eyes. And take a deep breath. And let it out. Take another deep breath. And let it out. Take another one. And this time, as you let it go, let it out. Let go of any thoughts coming to your mind. And now, breathing deeply and gently. Every time a thought comes into your mind, just let it go. There's another one. Just let it go. Take another deep breath. This time a really deep one. Exhale. As you do, bring yourself back into the room and open your eyes. So, how was that? How did it feel? What do you want to say?
Everyone's sleeping.
At this time of night, I'm not surprised.
Surprisingly difficult is to keep getting thoughts out of your head.
What?
Surprisingly difficult it is to keep getting thoughts out of your head.
Absolutely.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, well, even just thinking about it, got to get a thought out of my head.
Yes, exactly. The thing is, you will never get all the thoughts out of your head, but it does bring you to a stillness and a centre, and over time, it is highly effective. The latest research from America, it was in the New York Times last week, said that if someone meditates for 30 minutes a day for a minimum of 8 weeks, there will be a change in the density of the grey matter in the areas of the brain that deal with things like stress and sense of self, and memory and empathy. And there's also strong evidence, published research, that says that it has the ability to reduce blood pressure and lengthen our attention span. Now, considering the way youngsters nowadays seem to get shorter and shorter attention spans, you might find in a few years' time they'll turn into something like this because they realise that they need a longer attention span. The other thing about it is that there is something like meditation in every single spiritual or knowledge tradition that there's ever been in the world. And I don't think that that can be a coincidence. It wasn't difficult, was it? There's no rituals to go through, there's no gods to bow to. It's a very straightforward process. And how much easier is it for us to think clearly when our minds are relatively still, rather than rushing around all over the place. So perhaps you can see that it would be really useful. I've been meditating for 25 years now, and on occasions it's felt like a lifesaver, and still a lot of the time I make sure that if I'm going to have a really busy day, that I meditate before that day starts. Not during it, but before the day starts. Now, if we had the time, I could teach you a whole technique in about half an hour, but we don't. So what I suggest you do if you're interested is you go and find a book or a CD or a tape or a video or a course, and I promise you there are hundreds, if not thousands, around. And just find one that suits you. The only thing that I would say that is absolutely vital with meditation is that you keep on doing it, because its effect is absolutely cumulative, and you will find over time that it just becomes a part of your life, and that centeredness, if you like, is so useful in all your life. It takes out so much stress, because somebody cuts you up in the car and suddenly you just go, oh well. Or a bike goes through a red light, or whatever it is, all those sorts of things. Over time, the stress will go out of those situations, the tension will go out of them. But let's look at something that's rather newer. Neuro-linguistic programming. Let me tell you a bit about its history. Not difficult, because it only goes back about 30 years. Back in the early 20th century, a guy called Milton Erickson was looking at how he could use non-verbal communication with the patients in his psychology clinics. And what he found was two things. One was that if he used certain non-specific word patterns with clients, there was the opportunity to change their behaviour. Now, what's really important about that is this too, that he also took hypnotism off the stage and into clinical practice. And what he discovered was that nobody can ever hypnotise anybody else unless that person wants to be hypnotised. So there has to be a willingness. And that's really important in the way it's used within NLP. So you cannot change somebody's state into something that they don't want it to be. And obviously it's got to be used with discretion. Now, at about the same time, a woman called Virginia Satir was working with her patients, and she found that if she used really specific patterns, she got exactly the same results. And then in the late 1970s, two guys, John Grinder and Richard Bandler, who founded NLP, were looking at this work, and they were looking at the work of the Gestalt therapist called Fritz Perls, and they realised that it didn't actually matter whether you used a random pattern or a specific pattern, it still worked. And they created what they call a meta-model for transforming people's approaches to critical situations in their lives. And they do it by challenging the client's thinking and changing the underlying state that the client is in. But enough of the background, because it's a combination of art and science at this point. It works incredibly well in the hands of qualified people. But what's important about it, I think, is that it allows us to change our negative emotions. Those emotions that don't serve us, those ones that we get tied up in. And it also allows us to set and achieve realistic and meaningful goals, however large they might be, however big they might be. You know, we all long-term goals set, don't we? How many of you have broken your New Year's resolutions? How many of you didn't set any because you knew you'd break them? Yeah. The great thing about NLP is you can set resolutions, which are goals, and you can keep them and you can achieve them. So let's move on to the third thing. Thinking partnerships are part of the work of an amazing American educationalist called Nancy Klein. And I've been working with Nancy for about 10 years now. And her work, which is encapsulated in 2 books, one called Time to Think and another one out last year called More Time to Think, both were worth a read. Particularly, I'd recommend the second one because the first one, the first half of it is a bit what I call American. And she's not like that at all. She actually lives in the UK and is married to an Englishman. But it has a methodology within it that once we start to use it regularly, frees the mind so that we can work through problems at speeds we didn't think we could work through them at. So why does it work? Well, it works for various reasons and in the presence of certain criteria. And those criteria are attention, undivided attention from whoever is listening to you thinking, because it is about thinking out loud. And it works in the presence of questions. Somehow, the mind has a different way of working when it's presented with a question than when it's presented with a statement. And those 3 things make such a difference. And it works because logically, as individuals, if there's an issue or a problem that we want to think about, nobody has more information about that problem or that issue or whatever it is than we do. We're the ones who know most about any particular situation. And it works when the person who's listening to us think is totally focused on us. Absolutely undivided attention. And then they don't interrupt, and they don't ask questions, and they don't make statements. And they're so interested that they really want to know where our mind and our thoughts are going. And then it works because we have a way within this process of getting rid of what I call limiting assumptions. Now, they're different from beliefs, but we haven't got time to talk about that one now. But an assumption, 99 times out of 100, an assumption is untrue. And we could talk about that all night, but we're not going to. Just take it from me for now. And the great thing is we can take the assumption and turn it into what we call an incisive question, which then liberates your mind. So whatever it was that was blocking you, you can turn into a question which starts, if you knew that you could, then the mind just takes off again, which is just the most brilliant of processes. So, you'd heard we were going to do a meditation. Had you heard that we're going to do a mini thinking session? Because we are. What we're going to do is, we're going to take 3 minutes each way of somebody being the thinker and somebody being the thinking partner. So everybody's going to need a partner, but that's dead easy because you just get the person next to you, because it doesn't matter who that is. Now the other thing that's dead easy is being the thinker. Being the thinker is dead easy because all you've got to do is think out loud. The thinking partner's job is much harder because we're not used to not interrupting, we're not used to not asking questions, we're not used to not making statements. And as thinking partners, we're not going to do any of those, are we? So, as we started with the question, I thought we might as well stay with it. What I'd like you to do is find a partner right now. Can you be clear about who you're going to work with? Has everybody got a partner? Yeah? 2, 4, 6. Anybody not? Anybody?
There's a reason for that.
You're missing. Well, then you have to come and work with me. Alright, so this is going to be 3 minutes each way.
Wow.
I'll time it. First of all, who's going to think first? Who are the thinkers? Hands in the air, thinkers. Right. Okay? So remember, no interruption. Focus on the other person unobtrusively. Okay? So everybody clear? So let me just quickly summarize. Starting at the results end. We get the best results when we take the right action. That's absolutely a given. But what affects that more than anything is the quality of our thinking. And the quality of our thinking is affected incredibly by the clarity and the attentiveness of our mind. So, I would say, wouldn't I, that those 3 things help enormously. And they all support our physical, emotional, mental and spiritual self in every aspect of our lives. And that is how we can get a balanced life rather than a work-life balance. Now, the main thing with anything is that we do it our way. So I say to you, do it your way. I know this works. I've used it for years, I've used it in business. I've seen it time and time again. But what really matters at the end of the day is the way that you handle it, if you want to. So I would say, in the words of that 70s hard rock band Thin Lizzy, don't believe a word unless you've tried it for yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.